Today we talk to an expert on the impacts of cannabis and why you should know what he has to say. Welcome to Culture Shift, the Barry Farah Show. We are living in an American culture that has shifted from tolerant to cancel culture, from decent to rude, from optimistic to cynical, and from relatively safe to increasingly violent. But it's not too late. I hope to equip you with a historical framework applied to current events so you can lead and get America back on track for good. Hey, welcome back to the Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Not that long ago, marijuana was outlawed on a federal level and 0 states had conflicting laws. When people argued for some limited use of marijuana, the opponents would win the argument, saying that it was a gateway drug to many things that were far worse. Now, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, as of May, 36 states and 4 territories allow for medical use of cannabis products, and as of April, 17 states allow for some form of regulated recreational use. Today, my guest is Dr. Ken Flynn, board member of the International Academy on the Science and Impacts of Cannabis, and the author of Cannabis in Medicine, an evidence-based approach. So today, Dr. Ken Flynn, hey, we just welcome you. Thanks for coming on board to Culture Shift. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So first, as a board-certified physician in both physical medicine and rehabilitation, you're not a stranger to pain medicine. In fact, you are board-certified in pain medicine and pain management. So can you please just share with us, when is it appropriate to use cannabis? I mean, is it true that there's a version that if you strip it of THC that it can help you sleep, or are there some circumstances that you'd actually recommend medically approved use of cannabis for pain relief?
No. I think it's important to understand there's a difference between medical cannabis and cannabis-based medication.
Okay.
The difference is cannabis-based medications are pure, natural, proven, have met the rigors of scientific study, where medical cannabis is poorly tested, poorly regulated, frequently contaminated, and unproven. And actually, the International Academy for the Study of Pain and the New Zealand and Australian College of Anesthetists came out with a position statement a couple of months ago saying that it doesn't work for chronic non-cancer pain. So I think despite the fact that there is at the molecular level evidence that it may be an effective pain reliever, I think we should all support the development of a proven cannabis-based medication that can help with pain.
Okay, fair enough. Hey, by the way, thanks for taking time away from your surgery right in the middle.
No problem.
Right in the middle of your day.
Those background things out.
Nope. Thanks for coming along. So you've got a book, and it's this comprehensive compilation of multiple facets of cannabis recommendation, use, and effects. That's the subtitle. So your book points out that many clinicians aren't aware of the facts that are surrounding cannabis, and they're just kind of more guided by public opinion. Can you give us a couple examples of that? What do you mean?
Well, pain is a perfect example that it hasn't been proven to be an effective pain reliever. And I had a couple of well-known authors that did my pain piece. On the flip side, the folks from University of Alabama, Birmingham did a very nice research and were able to fast track a medication, a cannabis-based medication called Epidiolex, through the FDA for a narrow spectrum of pediatric seizures. And they were authors of my seizure section of the neurology chapter. So I think that there are components of the plant that can help in a variety of medical conditions, but dispensary cannabis isn't medicine. Marijuana is a plant, and we have a lot of plant-based medications already. We have aspirin, we have digitalis, which comes from the foxglove plant, but other plants may be harmful. I mean, we don't make medications from strychnine or hemlock. We have heroin that comes, from the poppy plant. I mean, that could be dangerous. So I think we need to have a lot of guardrails on things that people may be putting in their body, because we just don't know what is in the bottle is actually on the label, if it's labeled at all.
So what about the people that claim that they've had a significant reduction in pain? Is that what would fit into the filter of a medically approved, or what about that?
Well, the problem is that the products that are available varies so widely in terms of delivery. You
Okay.
can smoke it, you can eat it, you can put it rectally, orally, vaginally, you name it, you can deliver it.
Gotcha. Right.
The other concern is that the potencies are all across the board. You
Right.
have things that are low potency, and in Colorado, that the smoked bud flower averages about 17 to 20% THC, and then you get the concentrates that are 50% THC, and then the dabs, waxes, and shatters that are pushing 99%, sometimes 100%, nearly 100% THC, and those are very dangerous.
Okay.
So there's no control over what people can purchase and what they can ingest or smoke. And I've had a couple of patients, which is the exception, not the rule, that get off their opioids, which I'd love to get people off their opioids because we do have a drug problem in our country.
Okay.
But that's really the exception, not the rule. Generally, my patients that are using both marijuana and opioids tell me that the marijuana doesn't do for their pain what the opioids do. And I give them a choice because they're both centrally acting.
Okay. Now, I'm from Colorado too, and we're among the first states to legalize recreational marijuana. The Colorado Department of Revenue says it this way. I kind of got a kick out of it. Maybe it's not funny, but the Marijuana Enforcement Division is tasked with licensing and regulating the medical and retail marijuana industries in Colorado. Nothing like the local state version of the IRS to be involved in the following. Their mission is to promote public safety and reduce public harm by regulating the Colorado commercial marijuana industry through consistent administration of laws, regulations, and strategic integration of process management, functional expertise, and innovative problem solving. So that's a mouthful, but you say that's a little bit of hogwash because there are 15 known health risks that are connected to the use of marijuana. How does marijuana impact brain development? What's its impact on potential schizophrenia?
Well, with marijuana, the target organ is the brain. I mean, with alcohol, the target organ is the liver. With cigarettes, the target organ is the lung. And with marijuana, again, the target organ is the brain. And when the brain is not fully developed until around 25 years of age. So if you have a young person or an adolescent using marijuana, especially with these newer high potency products, we actually are in uncharted waters. We do not know what the long-term effects on them are going to be, although the preliminary data is showing it's not good. They have impacts on IQ. They have impacts on socioeconomic status, ability to keep a job or maintain a job, ability to maintain relationships, other drug-seeking behaviors, behavioral problems. So there's a whole laundry list of sequelae that are not positive. And I always ask people that I have this discussion with, it's like, send me the data where marijuana has had a positive impact on public health and safety and general health, and nobody can provide me the data.
Interesting.
As it relates to other mental health issues like schizophrenia, there's always that walk on eggshells because correlation doesn't equal causation is the argument you hear all the time. But the data is very, very strong between marijuana use and psychosis, as well as schizophrenia. And Sir Robin Murray from UK at King's College is one of our advisors on ISAC, which is the International Academy for the Science and Impact on Cannabis. He's probably the most quoted researcher on the link between marijuana use and schizophrenia, as well as psychosis. So there are, I tell my patients, because I have more honest, open conversation with them, I say, buyer beware. I have a consent form talking about the risks of depression and suicidality and, psychosis and panic. There are also other things like heart attack, stroke, arrhythmia, and sudden death. I mean, the American Heart Association.
There's a long list of things, but let's get to another angle. And I think if I were to tell me if I'm wrong, but I think your primary passion related to this issue is that you argue that if marijuana was really doing its job, opioid use would go down. But that's just not the case. It's not going down. What are the stats and why is marijuana increased use not decreasing the opioid problem?
That's a great question, because one of the platforms to legalize is that it's going to help our drug problem and our overdoses. But as you know, the CDC came out with a report recently that 2020 shattered another record of drug deaths in the United States. And interestingly, a very strong correlation to more states legalizing for either medical or recreational purposes. I mean, I can't prove that it's directly related, but I find it very interesting.
Right.
Here in Colorado, we've had medical marijuana since 2001. 90% of the marijuana recommendations are for pain. So you would think that we would have an improvement on our drug overdoses. But again, 2020 shattered another record. We've had the most drug deaths in Colorado ever. And if you look at it since legalization, prescription drug deaths went up over 100%. Fentanyl deaths went up over 800%. Cocaine and methamphetamine deaths have gone over 200% increase since legalization. And heroin deaths are up 45% since legalization. So it hasn't helped our opioid epidemic. And I'll provide the graphic for you to look at, because I think the graphic provides a lot more. I'm a visual learner myself, and I think it's very telling. And I always ask people if they can show me where on that graphic.
Well, let's plop up that graph right now for our audience. And so, what would you like for us to what would you like for us to notice here?
Well, you were going to see back in 2001 where we legalized through Amendment 20 the use of marijuana for medical purposes.
Okay.
And again, the vast majority of people getting medical marijuana cards get it for pain.
Okay.
So you would think if it's a good opioid substitute or a good pain reliever, we would have flattening or decrease in our opioid overdose deaths and other drug deaths, because all these substances like to play well in the sandbox. And over time, as you go, once we had de facto legalization in 2009, and then voted on legalization in 2012, and then implemented in 2014, all of our drug deaths have continued to skyrocket. COVID did not do anybody any favors and was a factor in our drug overdoses. But again, the use of marijuana for pain has not been shown to impact positively our opioid crisis or our drug problem that we have in our country.
Well, thank you for that. That's very descriptive. So, Rob Corey, I know you know this name. He's the lead attorney that really brought marijuana to Colorado. He's the one that was out front arguing for it and defending folks that were using marijuana. And I remember him being on a platform. I think it was with Jeff Hunt, if I'm not mistaken, but he has historically mocked those who had any concerns. In a variety of debates and panels, he's the one that would mock somebody like you and say, "Oh, you don't understand how this works." Now all that's changed. In April, he was laying out a mea culpa in the Colorado Springs Gazette. I'm sure you had a chance to look at that, where he basically recanted. Can you share with the audience what Rob had to say and what changed Rob Corey's mind?
I don't know what it is that changed his mind. All I can tell you is that his tune has certainly changed. And I feel that maybe perhaps the
data, maybe. Well, 10 years of bad data.
Well, the data is clear. I mean, I think we've had nothing but problems in Colorado since de facto legalization, which happened in 2009 when the dispensaries popped up all over the place. And Rob was the one that was passing out joints during 420 after we've approved marijuana for recreational purposes. He's had some issues with, the law or what have you, but for some reason, something must have happened in his life where he realized that maybe we were right. Perhaps we were right, that this is just big tobacco 2.0. This is not, it's not about chilling out with a joint after work over a glass of wine. This really is a public health and safety concern. We have driving impairment fatalities related to marijuana. We have adolescent use and addiction. We have a drain on the healthcare system. There's all these other facets to marijuana that has just made Colorado, not as attractive anymore to some people unless you want to come here and smoke pot.
No, I remember going down 25 years ago, 16th Street Mall with our very young kids. And it was just a wonderful family outing. It was peaceable and wholesome and pleasant. And right now, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable going down there with my adult kids in some instances. It's really changed the dynamic, the whole cultural feel.
And it smells like pot.
And it smells like pot. And, when it first came out, I remember still having a lot of business in Denver at the time. I'd be downtown Denver. They could see me with a suit on, and they'd come right up to me and just exhale right in my face, just presuming that I was, I didn't say anything to them or do anything that would solicit that kind of a response. They just felt that it was incumbent upon them to make sure I could smell what they were doing, and it just totally changed the dynamic. Well, it sure seems like recreational use should have had a lot more study before we went full bore with all of its unintended consequences. We have a college friend that had a son graduate from college. He's out of Oklahoma, came up to Summit County on vacation, and this was just after he graduated. And he picked up some of this, I guess, very thoroughly THC-laced gummy bears. He didn't know that they had a 45-minute release. He was just trying to get modestly high because he had never done marijuana before. He thought it was cool, it was legal, and he just took way too many. He didn't wait for the release of it, and unfortunately, he got into some hallucinations, and he tragically shot himself. And I was just wondering, is that kind of a problem isolated, or does that happen often, or does that type of a problem still continue today, or what's going on there?
It's a huge concern. And I remember that episode in Summit County. And there's been more of them. I mean, you had Levi Tamba, who was a exchange student from Wyoming that came to Denver right after legalization. He was 19 years old, wasn't a resident of Colorado, got a medical product, a cookie, gobbled up the cookie of 6 pieces, and people don't realize these edibles have a delayed onset of effect.
Right.
He became psychotic and jumped out of a 3rd or 4th story building and killed himself. You have Christine Kirk, who was on the phone with 911 after legalization when her husband gobbled up a bunch of edibles, became psychotic, and shot her in the head in front of her children because he was psychotic on marijuana. These things happen much more often than you would think.
Wow.
I mean, our emergency rooms are seeing people with psychosis coming in related to marijuana. There's only one thing on their drug test, it's THC. And again, I get yelled at for not recommending God's plant. But my response is God's plant doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
It's not the stuff in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. It's not the stuff in the bellies of the Egyptian mummies. God's plant doesn't exist when the THC content was 3 to 5%. Again, the average Colorado smoked bud flower, 17 to 20%, and you get the waxes, dabs, and shatters. That these products have only been around for like 6 or 7 years.
Right.
So we are completely in uncharted waters. And you read about these episodes of violence where the only thing that's related is THC.
Wow.
And I think there's going to be, when you actually look for it, it's very, very clear. It's a common denominator with a lot of these mass shootings. For instance, Kevin Neal in Northern California shot his wife, buried in a hole under their mobile home, didn't like a neighbor, killed them, killed 4 other people, shot up an elementary school, and there was only one thing on his toxicology. Here in Colorado Springs, we had the Planned Parenthood shooter that people are very well aware of that moved here for marijuana. He's still incompetent to stand trial, and about 3 weeks before him was the Halloween shooter, which in the middle of the day killed 3 people in downtown Colorado Springs. I have his autopsy report, toxicology. There was one substance on his toxicology, and it was THC.
All marijuana.
All marijuana.
Wow. And those are the extreme violence issues, but there are also just lots of medical concerns. I mean, we've discussed 3. Can you describe how marijuana just impacts addiction? What happens there?
Well, I'm not an addiction specialist, but I certainly have experience seeing patients that have opioid addiction, and we try to work with them on it. But marijuana is addictive. And again, you're going to see, you remember the big tobacco days when they had the hearings in DC saying nicotine's not addictive, nicotine's not addictive. You're
4 out of 5 doctors recommend Camels.
Camel. Well,
you go back to the 40s.
And dentists prefer Viceroys. Remember those? Yes. But the problem is that it is addictive. And especially when you have these more potent products that are easily accessible by our youth, it's very concerning. I mean, there's one facility in Denver, Dr. Christian Thurstone, he tells me that 97% of the kids he's treating for substance use are there for cannabis use disorder.
Wow.
Our kids are really struggling.
What was that percentage again?
97%.
Whoa.
I mean, our kids use all sorts of stuff. They use alcohol, they use other drugs. But when it comes to treatment, at one facility in Denver, 97% of the kids that are there for cannabis use disorder. And cannabis is the most prevalent substance found in completed teen suicide in our state. It used to be alcohol. And that trend coincidentally reversed in 2012 when we voted to legalize marijuana. Marijuana became the most prevalent substance found. Are kids overdosing on marijuana? No. Are they depressed because they're using marijuana? Maybe. Are they using marijuana because they're depressed? I don't know. It's a chicken and egg argument.
But you're saying there's a common denominator between the increase in Colorado Springs of suicide, and it seems like what's in the body of these young kids is marijuana.
Almost 20% of the time. Wow. 1 in 5. And I think less than, it's like 15% or 18% is alcohol. Okay. I mean, it's pretty significant. And it did change over time. I think once you normalize a substance and it's more readily available, more kids are going to use. And when more kids use, you're going to have more problems, period. Right. We didn't do a good job. I mean, the most dangerous drugs are the legal drugs we have now. Alcohol and tobacco, they kill thousands of people every year. Now we're going to add another layer of something legal. And no one has been able to provide me the data saying it's going to help our society. It's going to improve public health and safety.
There's also something on your website about neonatal exposure. I was stunned to see that the stillbirths connection between marijuana. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's there was a survey in Colorado several years ago where 70% of the marijuana dispensaries were recommending women use marijuana during first trimester pregnancy when the brain is still developing in the fetus. And with the only qualification you need as a bud tender, what are called the people behind the counter, is 1, experience with marijuana, 2, 21 years of age, and 3, you need to have a pulse. There's no other criteria. And they're making medical recommendations to these patients that are coming in with no medical training or background. So when you have an exposure during pregnancy, the data is becoming somewhat frightening because they're following these kids down the road. And the animal study is showing that this is intergenerational. So these kids that are exposed, they have behavior problems when they hit middle school. They have antisocial behavior. They have attention deficit. As they reach young adulthood, they have drug-seeking behavior, et cetera. And same is found in animal models. There was one study, the ABCD study that came out of Canada, I believe, several months ago, that at around 10 years of age, these kids are showing psychosis. Even though they haven't used the substance, those kids have a higher incidence of psychotic-like episodes. And I could not find any data on kids that are exposed to tobacco, opioids, or alcohol that are expressing psychotic-like episodes when they're 10 years of age. That is a frightening data point.
That's frightening. That is crazy. All right, let's go to this child abuse and neglect issue that obviously is of deep concern. You've got a chart to show us. Please explain what's going on here.
So the state of Texas represents about 10% of the national population. They have about 30 plus million people live in the state of Texas. So if you look at the child abuse and neglect fatality data from the state of Texas, when you have a dead child in the state of Texas, the substance found, either active use or past use by the perpetrator, is by far marijuana.
Wow.
The number 2 substance found when you have a dead child in the state of Texas by neglect or abuse is nothing. No substance found by the perpetrator. And then way below those are the things you would think would be surrounded with the active or current use or past use by the perpetrator with alcohol or opioids or methamphetamine or other drugs. but the graphic is very telling, because it's just the common denominator that you see. There was an instance in Dallas that a guy murdered his child, 16-month-old child in Dallas. There were skull fragments on the wall. The knife stab wounds all over the head and body of the 16-month-old baby. And the only substance found was marijuana in the dad.
Wow.
Who murdered his child.
Unbelievable.
That's sad.
Oh, it's so sad. So sad. Well, thank you so much for that. Let's go to something that's maybe a little less personal, but still extremely important. And that's these other concerns that are in addition to the medical concerns. You've got public health and safety issues just for driving impairment, and there's some legal implications. But I wanted to zoom in for kind of our last conversation on this environmental concern. You mentioned that marijuana is really bad for the environment, that that a lot of times folks will go offline and grow large volumes of product in the national forests. It causes lots of problems that are completely unintended, and that there's a whole bunch of money being spent on environmental cleanup when these guys get caught. And you mentioned that the famous Exxon Valdez oil spill actually was less expensive to clean up than some of this environmental cleanup. Can you speak to that? What's going on with the environmental side?
For an industry that prides itself on being natural and herbal and medicinal and safe and green, they've got a huge carbon footprint. For instance, the marijuana industry generates more carbon emissions in Colorado than its coal industry.
Wow.
About 50% more carbon emissions come from the marijuana industry. And California, for instance, they were predicting to clean up just the state of California about $70 billion. And the reference that I make is actually the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. That cost about $60 billion. Here in Colorado Springs, I was evacuated during Waldo Canyon fire. It was our city's largest urban wildfire. 2 people died, 350 homes lost. June of 2012, prior to legalization. And when the fire was out, they found a 22-acre illegal marijuana grow in the burn scar.
Wow.
So in California, they're diverting water where salmon don't spawn anymore. They're using banned pesticides, one called carbofuran, that an eighth of a teaspoon will kill a 300-pound bear.
Whoa.
They use pesticides.
That's worse than arsenic.
It's worse than arsenic.
Goodness.
And I think the person I know that's very involved in California says 100% of the illegal trespass grows in California have carbofuran in it.
Whoa,
and these illegal sites are littered with dead animals, trash, miles and miles of irrigation tubing, because they're not nice. Once they harvest their plant, they don't put the pipes and the tubing back in the stream so the salmon can spawn. They just leave them where they are to just water the ground where their pot plants used to be.
This is an area where you would think folks that might not normally be on your side of the issue could join up with you, because that the harm to the environment is much more severe than I think most people would ever even imagine.
I agree. And you would think that the organizations like the Sierra Club will be all over this.
You would.
They're not. And I don't know why they're not. I think they should really be taking this issue to heart and demanding that the industry be more responsible and take care of our planet, because a lot of these animals that are dying are endangered or already on the endangered species list. And some of them haven't been even seen in certain parts of Northern California for several years now, because they're dying. They're being killed by the industry.
That's amazing. So there's a lot, there really are quite a few number of issues that you could say are passion points for you as it relates to this. You do this voluntarily. What would be the number one reason you spend time trying to educate people on the harms of marijuana? What's that issue, and why does it hit you so strong to allocate time, energy in a volunteer capacity to try to help people see it?
That's a really good question. My wife asks me that all the time. I don't have a good answer.
Right.
All I can tell you is that, to me, it really is a matter of public health and safety, and really protecting our youth, because our youth are being targeted by a predatory addiction for profit industry because they want lifelong customers.
Mm,
And I think most people have no idea how dangerous this substance can be.
right.
Is everybody that smokes a joint going to become psychotic and do a mass shooting? No. Are they going to get into a car accident? No. Just like everybody that has a beer at a bar isn't going to get a car accident either. But the problem that we're seeing is the data is piling up, that the harms are far outstripping any real benefit or perceived benefit.
Ken, thank you so much for joining us today on Culture Shift. We're primarily reaching out to the Gen Z population and group. Millennials listen as well, but we're attempting to assist them in becoming successful and making great decisions. And it seems like to me from your work that just having a holistic view of cannabis, what they should be doing is just saying no thanks and living clean from it. Is that what you would say? What would be your statement to the typical 22-year-old out there that might not have all this data? What would be your compelling closing case?
I have a couple of millennials of my own, so I have these conversations with them myself. I'm sure I sound like a nihilist, but I'm actually not. I mean, I believe that there are components of the plant that may help people. I think I don't have a problem with people, what they do at their home behind closed doors. I don't care what people are doing behind closed doors. What I want this generation to understand is that this is not harmless, that there are going to be people negatively affected. There are going to be communities negatively affected. And until somebody is affected negatively personally, they're not going to get it. I can't tell you how many parents like your friend that I have met that have lost a child to suicide, homelessness, drug addiction, you name it. And it happens, and it will tear a family apart. It will break their family financially, emotionally, spiritually. It is something you do not want to have anybody go through. I think that's kind of part of my driving force is the parents that I've met, the kids that have been affected. And I'm sure a lot of the people listening in that generation know people that have had cannabinoid hyperemesis and ended up in the ER or had a seizure at a party because they were dabbing something they shouldn't have. I'm sure at least 80%, if not more, of the people listening know somebody that has had a negative event.
Yeah.
It's very
Thank you, Ken, thank you so much for your insights on this. We appreciate it. If you want more information on Dr. Finn's work, just do a quick, easy search for Cannabis in Medicine, or you can go to his website that he's the board of at iasic1.org and see all kinds of information there. Ken, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on board to help this next generation make great decisions, to be successful, and to live free. Until next time, God bless you.
Hi, I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. Check out today's show notes below this episode and at thebarryfarahshow.com. This podcast is also available in video format at The Barry Farah Show on YouTube. See you next time.